Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Alaskan bush. Although Noah Brown has faced numerous difficulties in his life, many people are unaware of the hardships that go on behind the scenes. Noah's existence on the Alaskan bush people show seemed to be full of adventure and the splendor of nature, yet behind that, despite his tough demeanor, many were unaware of the emotional struggle he was going through, yet his story is motivating to some. When the cameras weren't rolling, Noah was dealing with emotional pain that no one could see, along with sadness that few people can comprehend. He had to deal with the agony of personal loss in addition to surviving in the Alaskan wilderness. With familial difficulties, the majority of people, including his biggest admirers, are unaware of this obscure aspect of Noah's life. In his early years, Noah carried a huge emotional weight in addition to being a person who lived off the earth. Was exposed to the harsh facts of life while growing up, both from nature and his own family. Billy Brown was a pivotal person, and his family's distinctive Alaskan lifestyle was a source of pride as well as a challenging responsibilities, the strain of surviving under such harsh circumstances, and tension that eventually impacted the whole Brown family. But Noah's struggles went beyond the strain of living off the grid. They also included as time went on, Noah's personal life started to fall apart due to the emotional toll of the loss that genuinely altered him. Behind the scenes, he was dealing with grief of a kind that no one could see. That anyone anticipates happening to them, and Noah, like many others, had his own set of issues despite his family being close-knit. Was left attempting to maintain everything, but even the most resilient individuals falter under duress, and Noah was no exception. Noah Brown's difficulties, however, extended beyond his family life and the demands of being on television. They proceeded deeper. The ongoing stress of being the center of attention while attempting to manage a personal problem was what created everything became more complicated because nobody could fully comprehend the suffering he was carrying as everyone watched him on TV. Even though he made an effort to appear tough, the weight of everything was on his shoulders behind closed doors. It became evident that there were things he simply couldn't avoid, and as time went on, spectators noticed a shift in Noah. There was something different about him. He became quieter and less engaged in the show's high-energy moments. Fans were intrigued by this change because it was difficult to understand why he was withdrawing and what was actually continuing with him, but Noah concealed the majority of his suffering from them, leaving many to worry whether his life behind the cameras was more complex than the show revealed. There was an unseen tale that few people were aware of. This left a lot of people curious about what exactly changed Noah and what was going on in his personal life. Had such a profound effect on him that admirers didn't begin to realize the full scope of through Noah's hardships. It became evident that the psychological cost of coping with family issues and personal loss was much worse than anyone could have predicted. The tragedy he endured was a transformative experience that molded the person he is now. Even though Noah Brown's life on Alaskan bush people may have seemed exciting and daring to the typical audience, his backstage journey was a painful one, and his tale demonstrates that often the hardest battles are invisible. The suffering he endured was a part of him that, until recently, no one could see. In his life, he had to not only survive in the desert but also navigate the emotional wilderness. Many people were unaware of this aspect of Noah's life, which came with his own personal tragedy. Few people could comprehend what Noah was going through without putting themselves in his position, thus the mystery surrounding it remained. His anguish was genuine, and he held it to himself for a long time, possibly out of a sense of obligation to keep others guessing. Pride or a wish to conceal his personal difficulties, whichever the case, his admirers were left with more. There are more questions than answers, and as time went on, people's interest in what happened to Noah Brown only increased. Reminder that not all is as it seems. Even people who seem to be in control of their lives may be struggling with issues that nobody can witness. His narrative, which is one of suffering and resiliency and demonstrates the fortitude required to face unfathomable loss, but Noah persisted in displaying a side of himself that was much more nuanced than the public perception. Although tragic, the show's depiction of his hardships is evidence of his fortitude and will to persevere. Noah's path is one of survival, not merely in the Alaskan wilderness, even though life was not always easy. However, his sad loss was more than just what transpired in the emotional wilderness that many individuals experience. To him, but also about how he overcame hardship, his tale serves as a reminder that the most. Noah Brown's life is a story of tragic events that are concealed deep within, rather than the ones that are visible to the naked eye. Of survival, but there are sinister mysteries that the outside world is unaware of hidden behind the excitement of living off the grid in Alaska. Fans of Alaskan bush have observed him and his family navigating life in the woods, but what most people were unaware of the unseen hardships that went much deeper than the scenes depicted. Only a small portion of his reality was shown on TV. What transpired behind the scenes is even more complicated and tragic. The Brown family's story is well known for their fortitude in surviving in one of the world's most hostile settings. However, despite their strength, Noah's existence in the Alaskan wilderness was not always as easy as it appeared on television. Many people were unable to comprehend the difficulties Noah endured, and life on the show was portrayed as in wild animals, harsh weather, and a close-knit family who remained united through thick and thin, but beneath the surface, there was always a darker secret and things weren't always as ideal as they seemed. For a long time, supporters only regarded Noah as the strong one, ignoring the battle that he had to endure. Competent family member who was a team player and kept everything cohesive, yet behind the strong character was a young man battling emotions that no one could see because his life was more than just making ends meet. The Land, it was about dealing with personal suffering and loss from which there was no way out of the world. Thought of Noah as merely another Brown relative, but he was bearing a burden that even his closest relatives couldn't handle. Members didn't quite comprehend that living in such a remote location might make you feel alone, and that feeling is exacerbated when Noah's story is one of those personal tragedies that you are dealing with. He wasn't only residing in Alaska, he was, as the world looked on, Noah was dealing with a devastating reality that impacted every aspect of his life. Silently battling to conceal his suffering, but as time went on, it became increasingly evident that Noah's trip was more intricate than anyone could have predicted, and admirers started to observe minor shifts in his conduct. Statements suggested something more profound. Many people were unaware that Noah wasn't merely attempting to survive, that he was attempting to endure something much more challenging in the Alaskan wilderness. The psychological toll of loss and the anguish you couldn't see his face in the woods or on the surface of his relationships with his family. The real narrative is in the pain that was hidden deep within him and persisted throughout his entire life. Of Noah Brown is found not in his outdoor experiences but rather in the silent times when he had to confront his own inner demons abound, and when people became aware that Noah's life had more to it, their interest in his story grew. Then the program continued. Alaskan bush fans were left wondering why Noah was growing more. Why was he so different from the vivacious individual viewers had initially encountered? His emotional journey wasn't merely, it was a continuous struggle that took years to solve, the enigma of something that could be encapsulated in a few episodes. His transformation aroused interest in what had transpired and what caused the anguish that appeared to be forming his every action Noah took and everything that transpired behind the scenes wasn't readily disclosed to the public. He had to deal with tragedy alone because it was a very personal experience, and he didn't want to share his suffering with the planet, but everyone was left wondering what was going on, leaving them to speculate, conjecture, and attempting to reconstruct the aspects of Noah's life that were hidden. His actions both on and off screen were giving fans clues that something wasn't right and igniting their interest in learning more about his life. As the years went by, Noah didn't immediately decide to discuss his personal struggle. Instead, he kept it to himself for a while. Everything was bottled up as he tried to deal with it alone, which added intrigue to the mystery. What was it that Noah was going through, and why was he separating from those closest to him as the show progressed? As everything became clearer, people were captivated by the mystery surrounding his personal life. The more Noah retreated, the more others wondered how someone so strong and capable could be going through such a difficult time. Felt as though a shroud was covering his existence, and every time fans demanded to know what had caused the change, they were given more questions than answers when they believed they were gaining a glimpse into his world. Why was Noah so different now? What had transpired that caused him to appear so aloof? These questions continued to haunt us over the years. Viewers had come to love Noah and his family, so the sorrow he was going through was not something they could ignore. That was simple to explain, and it was this ambiguity that piqued people's interest as additional bits of even when Noah's tale started to emerge, it was difficult to fully understand the suffering he was going through. Much more than what could be depicted on a reality TV program, it focused on personal hardships, family issues, and real-life obstacles. Loss that helped mold him into the person he is now, and people's interest in Noah's life is continually growing as they continue to ponder what exactly transformed him during his experience with personal suffering. Served as a reminder to everyone that Noah Brown may have lived in one of the most stunning and perilous locations on the planet, but life is not always as it seems. However, his internal struggles were far more difficult than anything he encountered in the Alaskan wilderness. This narrative serves as a potent reminder that everyone faces challenges, many of which are hidden from view. The real tale of Noah Brown's heartbreak is still being told, despite his bravery and tenacity being shown on television. Noah Brown's life has always been presented as one of strength and resilience, leaving people to speculate about what might happen next. Despite the wild exploits and breathtaking scenery, he and his family are surviving off the land in Alaska. There is a darker aspect to the narrative of the Alaskan wilderness that was not fully depicted in the television program Alaskan Bush. Fans of the show frequently watch a side that deals with personal tragedy, loss, and the emotional toll that goes along with it. They questioned how Noah was able to be so resilient in such difficult circumstances, but they were unaware that the real difficulty was not only surviving in the wild, but Noah was shown as a young man with a huge heart who was anxious to overcome the anguish that had plagued him from the start of the show. Assist his family and accept the difficulties of residing in one of the world's most isolated locations. His abilities in he was a vital part of the Brown family since he built and lived off the land, and his hard work won him admirers. Effort and perseverance. But Noah was carrying a heavy load that would ultimately take it had a toll on him. His supporters couldn't see the suffering he endured, and it was difficult to resolve. Catastrophe that would permanently alter his life's trajectory, but Noah Brown's heartbreak wasn't something that was his ability to conceal his feelings and keep the anguish buried inside was evident to everyone watching the show. Keep up the appearance of a strong, capable guy, but with time, it became evident that the mental burden he was carrying was more than he could manage. The difficult off-grid existence wasn't the only thing that depleted him, it was that he went through a personal loss that alters you and left wounds that won't show for years. Noah attempted to bear the load by himself and made every effort to maintain the look of a man who was unaffected by the difficulties of Alaskan life, but the suffering was genuine behind closed doors, and it began to impact his relationships with those. Even though they were caring and supportive, his family, who were closest to him, were unable to completely comprehend the intensity of his grief. Were coping with their personal hardships, and Noah's quiet anguish just increased the burden they all bore, which exacerbated the fact that Noah felt compelled to shield them from his suffering so as not to put them under additional strain made matters even more challenging. Address his issues, but doing so just served to further remove himself from his loved ones. But, it wasn't until later that the whole scope of Noah's inner turmoil became apparent, leaving his admirers in the dark for a while, only watching snippets of his life on television. But as time passed, Noah's struggles became evident that something was amiss when his upbeat, diligent demeanor started to change. The young guy they had seen on TV was growing quieter and more reclusive. He was not spending as much time with his family, or his fans began to notice the change, but nobody was certain what had caused it, so questions began to mount up. What was going on with Noah, what had changed, and why had he changed so drastically? As the years passed, those who had followed Noah's life outside of the show became even more curious. For a long time, the Brown family wondered what was causing Noah to change. Was he simply fed up with the fans conjectured about whether he was being impacted by cameras or something more profound and intimate? Everything, including his mental health and relationship with his family, but the reality was that Noah's difficulties were extensive. Noah's tragedy was more severe than anyone could have predicted, and it took time for it to become apparent. It was a gradual, agonizing process that affected him over time rather than an abrupt occurrence, which is what made it so challenging. For others to comprehend, Noah tried to keep his pain inside while he was going through it. To maintain his strength and give the impression that everything was all right, but despite his best efforts, the pain continued to develop. His existence became about surviving emotionally rather than merely surviving in the outdoors. The sadness and trauma that had gripped him, and as Noah's story developed, more information about what few people fully comprehended, the personal tragedy he had been going through, but many could connect to it. Was a tale of loss and how it affected his life. The suffering he endured couldn't be resolved by merely it would take time to heal the severe emotional wound from avoiding the cameras or taking a break from the show. Supporters started to understand the strength it needed for Noah to persevere after learning more about his path. As the years went by, interest in Noah's life only increased, despite the times when it seemed like everything was coming apart. People were curious about what had transpired with him, what had changed in his demeanor, and what was the Noah was obviously a private person and didn't want to tell his story because of the tragedy that had hit him so profoundly. Suffering with the world, but that only served to heighten the mystery and leave admirers wondering what had actually transpired. To Noah and why, as his story progressed, he appeared so different from the person they had initially seen on television.